Okay, let's look at the story of the mythical Tower of Babel and show a connection to of the Pyramid of Cholula, which is on the right here, and you can see how they've shown that it was actually built upon another pyramid, and due to that fact of how huge it is actually the largest volume of pyramid that we do have. And what's the connective between these two? Because the Tower of Babel is a credible story, of course, that comes off the idea of where different languages come from and so on. But both of these, other than having a step pyramid situation going along with it, have a few more tellings. Now we know about Genesis and that idea that after a great flood, the people all came together. They had one single language, which now we have only one analog for that in a modern day, which is Proto-Indo-European linguistics. Because everybody from Sanskrit in India all the way through to Celtic and ancient Irish languages and everywhere in between has this same issue on their language, that it's all connected to Proto-Indo-Europeans, or what we used to call Aryans. The oddity on this situation is that Sumerian doesn't have a Proto-Indo-European connection to it. It's somewhat different. But oddly, in their mythologies and everything, you can see the same stories. So it looks like basically they just did a variation on a theme with their linguistics and kept a lot of things sacred just as they were. But this idea of the Tower of Babel, where God gets mad that people are going to try to build a tower up to him and take over somehow. That's the concept given. Well, we know nowadays if we built a tower this tall, that wouldn't mean anything. We have skyscrapers 10 times this height. And I don't know if you or anybody's ever found a city in the clouds floating around in heaven and that idea that was there. But there's a similar idea on why Cholula was destroyed before the Aztecs got there and they tried to repair it. We'll get to that here in just a minute, but this is, found in Iraq and in the area between the Tigris and Euphrates and and everything, and Babylon. And it wasn't the pyramids. It was, it was a pyramid. It was a step pyramid. Well, lots of people have pyramids around over there. I've shown you ones in Greece, all over the Mediterranean. There's a huge swath of them up in China, which are projected to actually have to do with the Proto-Europeans because they predate Chinese being in the area by over 1,400 years, or at least the one that they checked did. And so that made everything seem kind of odd there. But in this idea of Babel, God gets mad, and so he smites everybody, and then they all have to speak different languages. And this is why supposedly there's different linguistics everywhere, or why maybe they don't just have Proto-Indo-European linguistics as one language, but it spread into all these different languages, which made it to where people couldn't quite understand each other. Some people look at this story as trying to be all-encompassing of the world and why there's different languages. Others say, no, this is whenever they have the same people with blue eyes and genetics and all this stuff that are running every one of these civilizations, and how they have a different language from each other. Again, it's not trying to encompass the whole world, but once Christianity tried to encompass the whole world, they try to use things like this and other tales to further the idea that God meant the whole world. Just like they do whenever they say Jesus was looking over the whole world with Satan, and he was just standing on a little hill over here near Israel. Well, how far could he see? Right. So this Babel, Tower of Babel, has actually been found, believably so, as being this ancient ziggurat, which now is just melted down because they made the body of it not out of fire bricks and so on, and it got inundated with water. When it got inundated with water, it kind of ruined its construction, and it was way up until Nebuchadnezzar, whenever he tried to repair the thing and finish it off. This is in the 600 AD type range, and it would have been something that the biblical people, when gone into captivity, would have been experienced to having happened recently. And then, of course, there's the story of how it happened originally, or why it wasn't built when it was supposed to be built, or why it got thrown down. And in the Bible, they tell you God smoted it down because he was fearful that they were getting too close, that they could just come up and just walk into heaven now. And that's not the way it was supposed to be. So everybody can see this as an allegory in a modern day, because whenever I was a kid and I heard about these stories, I went to Six Flags with somebody, and for some reason the elevator wasn't working, so we had to walk up the stairs all the way in the biggest tower thing that's there. And whenever you get about halfway up, I thought to myself, we're taller than the Tower of Babel now, and we're still going, and God's okay with it. Got to the top and looked out in the distance and away a little bit, because we're in Arlington at Six Flags, away from Dallas, and it's huge high-rises, but we could see them in the distance, and they all seemed to be okay. They also seemed to be quite far away from actually touching the clouds in any way, much less running into heaven. And in fact, airplanes have been flying all over, and none have ever ran into this weird heaven that's supposed to be a city in the clouds. But I did a video not too long ago showing that, well, God used to be walking around in the cool of the day in the garden in Genesis, but slowly over time he fades away from us. Next thing you know, he's up on a mountain or in a tent that only certain people can see, if they're even really seeing anything. Next, all of a sudden, he's just up in the cosmos and really hasn't made contact with anybody in thousands of years, or done anything to show anything for thousands of years. But lo and behold, we have this same idea of this Mesopotamian ziggurat, like the one of Entenmannki, as I was telling you about, and how it got destroyed. And that was only redone again by Nebuchadnezzar II back in the 6th century BC. And so 300 years later, Alexander the Great came through and he destroyed it again. So it really only lived a short period of time, didn't it? And there's not really that many connectives, but then if we just go off the straight concept of it, step pyramid, this, that, and the other, okay, well, what's the analog with their story of the Mayans and so on about how this pyramid came to be? Well, they've got this strange story that's attached to it, and also it tells you the people all lost their speech. You see, they tell a story that these ancient, bearded, light-haired giants were building it, and they all got into an argument with each other and so on, and by doing so, and they were trying to build this sun temple up to touch the sun, which is a strange idea whenever you can go a few miles away from there and you go, well, that mountain is much taller than this thing's going to be, even no matter how much we pack on top of it. But that mountain is just cool, but this is not. So the gods got mad, and what they did was they caused frustration with these giants, and they ended up getting spread around. And so A, they lost their stonemasons, and B, all the giants went away. There are stories of giants in South and North America, from Patagonia all the way up through Lovelock Cave and all kinds of other ones that are showing you. And quite often they talk about bearded people whenever Amerindians, North or South, do not have any facial hair whatsoever. They even say Quetzalcoatl has facial hair. And that's made a lot of people to believe the idea, along with a few other things, that when the Vikings supposedly came here and only made it to Newfoundland, and way up there in Maine and past, that they actually made it much farther. There's a lot of artifacts that show they did, but one thing that's damning is that all the dogs that are in South and Central America are all related to Norwegian type dogs and Danish type dogs from the Wayback Machine. And so that shows you a connective right there. But these giants, they said, got into this big argument and, forced upon them by gods, and they're called a Quinamo. And so they were trying to build it up to the sun, but then the god didn't want them to do that. Crazy how they pick a blue-eyed god in this concept here as they show it, but didn't want them to do that. And so he scattered those giants and left it in ruins. And that's why whenever we found it originally, when we met up with them, this is the story they told. There was these white people kind of things, but they were giants as compared to us, and they built all of this. They don't take credit for it. They say that they're the ones that built it, and the reason they aren't here anymore is because of this thing that happened with the sun god. Very similar to the story that went on with the ancient Sumerians. Not the one you tried to be believed in the Bible, but the reality of how that happened with these people and those. Yeah. And also, they no longer could speak to the giants. Wow, that just adds another layer. Each of these layers gets to be a part where it's like 1 in a million if they're not connected and know the stories. And then you're going to have a hard time getting anybody to believe that they kept the story from before the Younger Dryas event, that they knew something back then, and kept it for 9,500 years, and then just showed up with it saying it like, oh, the reason our temple's busted down is this story that goes along and carried along with this whole idea of the Tower of Babel. Pretty crazy. I'm just going to let this one go here. Let me know what you think down below. Peace.